Well, welcome to our Inspiring Thoughts podcast today. We're really lucky to have Nicki Eyre here, Director of Conduct Change and a specialist in workplace bullying. Nicki, great to have you on board.
Brilliant to be here, Stephen. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, really good, really good. And we're starting on a Monday, which is a good start to the week for me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes, I always love a chat with you, Stephen, so this is just a perfect way to start the week.
Lovely. I'll send you the money in the post, Nicki, for that comment. I'll send you the money for that.
Thank you.
Like with all our guests on the show, they have 7 questions sent to them in advance so they can have time to prep, etc. So we get that real good, rich information from them. But before we start, Nicki, would you just tell our audience what's your kind of career so far? Where have you got to make you a kind of workplace bullying specialist? Where have we got to today?
So I started my career in finance. So about the first 7 years of my career was in a number of different finance roles, and through a number of companies being sold, moved around, restructured, I ended up deciding to change career, and that's when I started moving into education and training.
Yeah.
And so worked from the ground up in that career, basically. So administrating, managing out centres so that you're actually within the community, lecturing, teaching, right up to senior leadership roles across the whole spectrum, really. But unfortunately, at one point in my career, I was bullied myself.
Right.
And bullied out of one of those senior roles. And what actually part of my recovery was really learning about workplace bullying, which led to me setting up the business as it is today. So I've been probably self-employed for, probably working in this particular area for about 7 or 8 years, with the business actually set up just over 4 years ago.
Yeah. Fantastic, isn't it? And it's showing that really breadth of career as well, understanding different roles, etc. And I really like the point there of how you said you've gone through bullying, but you wanted to learn and understand the process. And I suppose that's the idea of the podcast today, because we hear lots of words about bullying and people use, but today is about really kind of trying to understand it from your expertise, which I'm super excited about, really excited. So our first question as we dive in, what does conduct change mean? So it might be one of those questions that you go, well, it's pretty obvious, Steve, but actually, what does it mean, conduct change?
Yeah, so for me, conduct is about behaviour, and there's 2 elements to this. So conduct is about, the manner in which individuals conduct themselves. And particularly, I'm looking at that in the workplace. But also we're looking at the way in which an organisation is managed and directed. So because that obviously influences behaviours and conduct as well. So when I chose the name Conduct Change for my business, it was really about how can we help businesses change behaviours so that it actually supports them moving forwards and helps to prevent workplace bullying. And there's a huge amount of overlap with a lot of the culture work that is being done. But it's when you're getting into bullying complaints, bullying and harassment, then it is a little bit more complex and nuanced to understand.
Yeah.
So that's the reason that I kind of chose the name for my business, because it really reflected the 2 elements, working with the individuals and with the organisations.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the things that was really important to me was that because I'd been through it myself, I wanted to give something back as well.
Yeah.
So when I set up the business, I decided that the work that I did with businesses would then help support a social purpose, which is around campaigning, awareness raising, education around workplace bullying.
Yeah.
Which is why this is just such a fantastic opportunity to share some of that knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's really where we look at the Stop Hurt at Work campaign, which is looking at legislation regarding workplace bullying. We're looking at things like the conference, and we're looking also at subsidising moving on programs, which helps individuals who have been through this and just need that little bit of extra support to move on and get their lives and careers back on track again.
Yeah. And Nicki, I think that's really good point. A couple of bits about organisational colleagues, individuals, and then social, what other work can be done? And I know there's some great work going on with the campaign that you've got going at the moment, and there was some good success. I think, was it this year or last year that we started to move through Parliament from that aspect?
This year,
This year,
yes.
yeah.
I'll get very excited about that shortly.
Yeah, so actually you can see that you truly believe and a passion that it's not just a work related, that social element really comes through loud and clear. It's really important.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that when we look at the impact of bullying, and yes, it's a social purpose, but actually it's that social need for belonging,
Yeah,
and the isolation that bullying can cause, that can do the most damage to individuals.
yeah.
So actually, in both senses, it's incredibly important in this context.
Yeah, no, spot on, absolutely spot on. And I know from working with you as well that the passion that comes through to really help colleagues, and even like with myself, I've experienced bullying over the years, and it is a lonely, horrible place to be. You question yourself, doubt, etc. Whereas having someone to talk to or just kind of rationalize it as well is super important, isn't it?
Yeah, that education, that understanding what's going on, being able to make sense of it is such an important part of the process, because the sooner we can make sense and do something about it, that early intervention, the faster it gets resolved and the less damage is done.
Yeah, no. But it's one of those ones that it just goes through my head of the phrase we were all taught at schools, and it's sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That's a lie, isn't it? Let's be honest. Come on. So if you think about now, names and words and it really can hurt people from that aspect.
Absolutely, yeah. Words can be cutting, and actually it's not even words. Sometimes it's just those small behaviours, or that blocking people, or the isolating, cutting them out. There are so many things that can really hurt other people, and I think particularly in this time of social media, working online as well, you know, it travels across multiple mediums now, doesn't it? So and for me, I always say that with bullying, anything that can happen in the room can pretty much translate online unless it involves physical contact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that leads nicely into the next question: is what is bullying? So people say to me about bullying, and you go, right, let me try and explain it. So what is bullying?
So bullying, if we think about bullying as a continuum of behaviours, and so that can start from moments of incivility and rudeness. It can be physical behaviours, so it could be, you know, anything from just that slight turning of the shoulder away to block somebody from a conversation, the eye rolling, those microaggressions that we hear about, right up to, if it's physical, it can go right up to physical violence. Verbal as well, so that can be anything from gossiping, whispering about people. It can be ignoring people and not talking to them, and then it can go right up to shouting and screaming at people. But probably the most prevalent area now that we hear about is the psychological aspects, and really that way of making people feel humiliated and belittled and making them doubt themselves, and the gaslighting, where people are made to believe that their sense of reality is incorrect. And so that's where the real damage comes, because actually they're going to withdraw into themselves, they're going to not know what's going on. It really is going to affect their mental health, right up to the point of potentially causing trauma and psychiatric injury. So bullying can take a huge different number of forms of behaviours. And I think the thing to remember is that we can all exhibit bullying behaviours from time to time. But what matters is, are we aware of them? Do we apologise when it's a one-off, when we've got something else going on, when you know, an external stressor is affecting us, or is it a pattern of behaviour? And unfortunately, what happens in some organisations is that what we see when we enter an organisation is, well, these kind of behaviours get rewarded, and therefore I observe that, I learn that even at an unconscious level, and I start to adopt them. And that's how bullying behaviours turn into a bullying culture, if you like. And observation, most of our learning about behaviour is through observation. So, you know, it's a little bit like, you know, let's have a speak up campaign. You can tell people to speak up, but they don't see anybody doing it, or they see what happens when people do that, and they, you know, they're inevitably the ones more often than not that end up ill or leaving their jobs. And so everyone thinks, well, I'm not going to speak up because I don't want that to be me. So it's the observation of what happens that is much more powerful than any policy or procedure that we can put in place.
And it's.
Did I answer the question there?
Yeah, you did. And that was beautiful. That was like, if we were listening to Family Fortunes, that was like the top answer. I was just going, yes, that makes sense. That does make sense. And it's the bit about how we receive. But I think I really like that, Nicki, that we might exhibit a kind of one-off or whatever, but we apologise and we go, "Joe, I'm sorry about that," you know. But it's when it's a continuous process, and I really love the way that you linked it back into the organisation of that. We see so many untrained managers that go into managerial roles, and then they follow the person before and go, well, that must be the culture we must follow or adapt, etc., rather than actually understanding. And I've just got this big moral belief recently, it's just kind of hit me, of people do know right from wrong. I think people do know right from wrong. They don't have to have a training course. They know whether it's good behaviour or bad behaviour, unless I'm really wrong on that. But that's just my belief in recent times, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we do. I think we all do. But at the end of the day, if it becomes the norm, if it becomes accepted, but also when it's the norm and it's accepted, our need for belonging is probably the greatest human need that we have. And so what we do is we think, well, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but I need to fit in with this group. And therefore I'm going to adopt those behaviours. And as I say, we might not even do that at a conscious level. But we start just moving towards those behaviours until we don't see them anymore. And that becomes the problem, when we almost become blind to the problem, or we refuse to acknowledge it. So I remember when I was setting my business up and everybody kept saying, don't use the word bullying. You know, businesses don't like it. And I just said, well, neither do the people on the receiving end of it. And so I was, you know, a little bit spun in my own way, and I carried on. And actually what we're seeing now is that it's coming to the forefront. You know, obviously we've been talking about sexual harassment and racism and all of the sorts of, you know, different areas like that, because we've had the Equality Act since 2010. We've got all the protected characteristics. We've had the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, all these kind of things. And so people have been talking about harassment and, you know, all the other kind of protected characteristics that go with that for quite some time. But bullying has always been a little bit of a grey area. And it's been quite subjective. And so people say, well, we can't do anything about it because it's subjective. Well, actually, no, we need to move away from what was your intent, and we need to look at what was the impact of that behaviour. And you can see that in the definitions of bullying that come through. So if you go to ACAS and look at the definition there, it's moved away. It used to have the word intent in there. It's come out now, and it actually says, you know, it's behaviour that could cause physical or emotional harm. So we've seen that shift in the definitions. We've seen that shift in the way people are talking about it. And we're also seeing regulatory bodies now starting to say, actually, we're not prepared to put up with this behaviour anymore. You know, for the financial sector, for the legal sector, they're starting to look at this. Are you fit and proper to work in this sector if you are a bully? So those questions are now starting to come up. They're starting to go into the guidance.
Yeah, which is
Only
fantastic,
pay,
isn't it?
yeah,
Absolutely
it is.
fantastic. And it is
Yeah,
about changing words and that. And also, if you took Generation Z, X, Y, they look at organizational culture as one of their key
yeah,
kind of priorities and going, actually, would I want to go to that culture that's led from a bullying perspective or not? You can't have the chance to voice your opinion or voice your words in a professional way.
yeah,
It's just got so many other kind of benefits to resolve a good culture rather than leaving it festering. It's what we've always done, isn't it?
yes, yeah. And you see so many articles now, don't you, or people saying, well, they're just snowflakes, you know, they're not
Yes.
resilient enough. And actually, particularly, you know, when you're talking about, you know, Gen Z and you know,
Yeah.
that kind of generation coming through, they've been brought up in a very, very different way, a different era. We didn't have social media growing up. They have information thrown at them constantly. They've also been brought up in a much more risk averse kind of world, if you like, where we're constantly we're putting rules in, we're trying to keep people safe,
Yes.
but it
Yeah.
can sometimes go a little bit too far. And then you throw in the pandemic on top,
Yeah.
and you think, well, actually, there's a huge amount of change and information there that can really unsettle people.
Yes.
But one of the really important things is they're the ones that say, well, that will speak up. And they're getting punished for it, and they're getting called snowflakes, where actually they're saying, we don't want this.
Yeah.
And instead of people further up who've gone, well, it was good enough for me, you know, suck it up and get on with it.
Yeah.
Start listening to the fact that actually, you know, there's always been intergenerational differences. Of course there has. Of course there has. But start listening to, actually, we don't want to work this way. We don't think it's healthy to work ridiculously long hours. We don't think it's a good idea to feel belittled and humiliated and shouted at in the workplace. We're actually not appreciating that. And so we're not going to work for you.
Yeah.
There's a really clear message there.
Yes.
To be heard.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I think that clear message. So if we kind of look now, so with kind of the cost of bullying, etc., you know, what does that affect the UK economy each year, or how does that look? Because it's okay to talk about it, but then people go, okay, it sounds nice, Nicki. We've got, you know, organisation, but what's the cost to organisations?
And you picked up a really important point there. You know, we've talked about kind of the moral objective of doing the right thing, but actually there's a real competitive advantage, because conflict in the UK is costing businesses 28.5 billion a year. So that's just over £1,000 per employee. And if we look at that in terms of how that breaks down, if people are encouraged to understand behaviours and make sense of what's happening really early on and try and find those really early resolutions, those human conversations, those one-to-one human conversations, that's what we're talking about here, then out of that 28.5 billion, you may be looking at $250 million. So it's a tiny amount that it really costs to really resolve things early on, help people make sense of what's going on, help people have those conversations if they're not able to just do it for themselves. Once we go into, and one of the things we do in these situations is we tend to push people towards formal processes.
Yes.
You know, it's, oh, you've got a bullying complaint, well, put a grievance in. Don't go there. That's the worst thing you can do, because actually the cost of formal procedures within the research that was done, and it was commissioned by ACAS, and what they actually found was that the cost of formal procedures, when you think about, you know, the individuals who are involved, the management time, everything like that, 12.8 billion. Now, the actual cost of the legal processes and litigation is actually quite lower, 0.77 billion. And that's primarily because very few people get that far. Because they're either too ill or they've, you know, been treated so badly that they did leave. But by far the biggest element of cost is all about the cost of resignation, absences, presenteeism, not just from the individuals involved, but from the ripple effect on the teams around them as well. And that actually comes out at 14.7 billion. That's a huge amount of money. And I don't think people really take on board the ripple effect of bullying cases. You know, they talk about, well, they should be kept confidential, but there's gossip, there's rumours, there's the people who are brought into it. It all impacts on the way in which an organisation runs, how people feel within that organisation, whether they feel safe, absolutely links to psychological safety. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's costing you a fortune. And that's not just within that sector as well, but in that sense, but actually in terms of any businesses that have shareholders, what they're finding is that shareholders now are, if you look at the environmental, social and governance agenda, the social agenda is now looking at how you treat your people. And they don't want to invest in businesses where there are claims of bullying and harassment. And actually, there was another piece of research done that showed that shareholders who invested in, if they'd invested in particular businesses where claims were made, then they would have lost, you know, their investment would have gone down by 20%, as opposed to gaining by 150% if they went into businesses which had a good reputation for the way they treated their staff. So, you know, it has a much bigger impact than the two people that we tend to think about in this situation.
And you know, I was just smiling in a very nice way then of and you know, the work that we do around changing people's policies and modernising policies to make it fairer, more inclusive, etc. And the bit for today is, I think we've got the heart and the mind connecting of actually I get to work with a load of organisations that go, we see the benefits, Steve, of changing or doing things differently, but they're not convincing their CFO or COO or CEO. Whereas taking the heart and the commercial sense, people then go, do you know what, we get it. We get both sides of the story, rather than the heart saying that this is a problem, let's talk about it, and the CFO or COO go, okay, but commercially, what difference does that make? We just knitted it together perfectly. I mean, it's a no-brainer, isn't it, Nicki? Let's be honest.
It is, isn't it? You know, if you're talking to somebody and they've got 200 employees, you've immediately got £200,000 a year. What would they like to do with that money? I mean, you know, it's when you can put it that simply in a calculation. Obviously, it isn't that straightforward, but in terms of just getting that initial interest, that's it's a quick way of doing it. And absolutely, they should be looking at this in terms of the competitive advantage as well.
And I think the other bit, the other cost, which we haven't talked about, is then the productivity. I know you said presenteeism, but then the productivity on the back of that. And the other part as well is, people just think when there's a bullying issue or harassment or a grievance, etc., it's just those two people. It's not. It's everybody around that gets involved. They feel the impact. They know what's going on. Then we get allies, gossip. It just grows arms and legs, and then people are not being productive on what they're supposed to be paid for, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that gets forgotten so much. Yeah, definitely.
And what can colleagues do if they're being bullied? So what can they do, Nicki? Or where can they get help, or etc.?
I mean, there's a huge amount out there. We have a resources page on our website, but there's a huge amount of information out there now about the kind of the different types of bullying behaviour. So the first thing is there's kind of two elements, isn't there? There's that self-reflective piece about, oh, you know, what was my role in this? Am I taking something to heart because I might have had a bad experience previously or something like that? But also looking at the behaviours objectively, are they bullying behaviours, or was this a one-off incident? Was this something different? Was that out of norm, out of character for that person? Is it something that you can go back and have another conversation about and say, actually, you know, that didn't go too well. I felt really uncomfortable leaving that. Can we try having that conversation again? You didn't seem like yourself. It could be that you can have that conversation. But the first element is always to try and make sense of what is happening. And so part of that is about reflection on yourself and your own behaviours. Part of it is about looking at the behaviours. Are they actually bullying behaviours? What they will tell you is, you know, start to document this. All of that, when you start to document, is basically saying, I'm documenting this because I want to put a legal case forward. That's essentially where that root comes from. Actually, can you have a human conversation? Can you actually sit down with that person and have a conversation? Or can you get somebody else to come in and facilitate a conversation just to prevent it escalating? And the sooner you can do that, the better. Now, it may be that actually this behaviour continues and you do start to notice it more and more often, and you might need to write things down. But, you know, in that case, make sure that there's two elements here. There's the what actually happened, so the actual facts, where you were, what was done or said, were there any witnesses there, did anybody else see or hear what was going on? But then the impact. So the impact, how do you feel at that time and how do you continue to feel? And so even actually if we get to the informal complaint stage, if you get the right support at that stage, you can still bring it back, you can still repair those relationships. There's still that possibility. What I would say is try and do that as soon as possible. The other element of this is, you know, your health has to come first. So if this is impacting on your health, then take note, get support, go to your GP, get, you know, therapy as well if you think that will help you. It might be that you have an employee assistance program that will allow you to access that as well. But don't let it go on. But sometimes we don't really recognise that this is happening to us until it's been going on for a while as well. So the big thing for me is try and avoid formal processes. Don't be afraid to walk away. If you can get another job and leave and find an organisation that better suits your values, then do so. If you can speak up, if it feels safe to speak up, and that's the key thing, then do so. If you go to formal processes, what we have found, and we've done some, we are partners with the Speak Out Revolution on our Stop Hurt at Work campaign, and they've done some research that shows that when people go into formal processes, they're more likely to have their mental health and their physical health damaged. And from memory, I think mental health was about 73% saw a reduction in their mental health as a result of going into formal processes, and 50% saw a drop in their physical health and well-being as well. So really be aware of that, both as an individual and an organisation, that those formal processes are incredibly damaging. And we don't want to go there unless we can possibly help it. If that is the only route open to you, if you do decide to go through that, then your health, your well-being is incredibly important to take care of all the way through that. Get yourself an incredibly good support network. If people at work move away from you, don't take it personally. That's about self-preservation. It's about keeping their jobs, keeping the roof over their head, paying their mortgage, paying their bills. You know, that's not about you, that's about self-preservation. And so really recognise that in the process as well.
And do you know what, Nicki, you just articulated that beautifully then. And I was just sitting there thinking, first of all, that good self-reflection, I think it's super, super important, because it could be you may have done something or may have triggered or kind of from that, but also just to think about from that perspective, trying to resolve it early, because we know that that early resolution kind of part, that it could be done and dusted within a week or two. Whereas if you go that formal process, then what happens is it gathers arms and legs, and it actually starts eating away more and more. And then we're gathering more evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt that actually, so then we're spending more and more time and it's eating away at us in a horrible kind of fashion. And I also like the bit there of we do have the right to leave. So if there's an organisation, and I've been there, that if the values don't match, then it's time to leave. Have the that kind of spirit to go, do you know what? That's not going to cross my morals or values anymore. It's time to move on. And that's hard to do because then people do move away from you, the self-preservation, etc. But at the end of the day, you go, no, that's my morals, and that's how I'd like to lead. And it's
Yeah.
incredibly enriching and therapeutic to do that. But I think you've just articulated all different sides of that as well, and how people behave if they do go away from you. It is that self-preservation part rather than them siding in with the organisation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you know, when we talk about being able to leave, you know, sometimes that's really hard to do because your confidence will have been knocked, your self-esteem will have been knocked. But that's why if you can start to recognize it, the earlier you can recognize it and be able to make decisions, the better. The longer it goes on for, the greater the chance of trauma.
Yes.
And you know, that affects us physically, psychologically. It affects our cognitive functions, our ability to remember things, to focus, to concentrate. That impact on memory then means that we look like we are performing badly as well, which is why so many of these get turned into a performance issue.
Correct. Yes.
And it's right, it's not a performance issue. It's about what's gone before. So yeah, absolutely.
Because what the organisation or that pick up then and go, well, their performance has gone down. That's easier to manage, isn't it? Because I can see the numbers, I can see the data. Whereas that behaviour before, you know, can't really. Whereas actually, you can see it. And you know, when I said earlier, people can see wrong from right. Leaders, we need to help say that you can see these behaviours. We need to, if we can nip them in the bud early enough, that is beautiful for everybody all round. But I think you've just showed today, you know, the positives of doing that. It kind of goes hand in hand.
Absolutely. And you know, one of my pet hates is when people say, well, they're oversensitive. No, actually, when you are going towards trauma, what you actually become is hypersensitive, which is a symptom, and a hypervigilant. So when they say, well, they're now seeing everything, they're perceiving everything to be bullying, of course they are. They're on a constant state of high alert, that stress, high alert, fight or flight, even a freeze response. You know, they are absolutely looking for danger in every corner because they're frightened. They are afraid. They feel unsafe. They are not being oversensitive. They are actually trying to preserve their life. And that sounds really dramatic, but actually, when we look at some of the research, then it's really important.
Well, you just imagine that cortisol going through that person's body, that stress drug, setting off the amygdala or amygdala. It's constantly heightened, isn't it? And it's looking for every bit, and it could be stuff that's there or not there, but I'm trying to look for it to kind of reassure me, or you know, that I'm in control. But that fight, flight, freeze, fall, etc., takes over. So I just think that's another way of, rather than saying you're oversensitive, because that's going to then trigger the person even more, isn't it? More cortisol is going to rush through their body, going, oh no, I'm oversensitive now. What else is there? Isn't it?
Oh, you're not resilient enough. Well, of course I'm not resilient enough. My resilience was great before this started.
Yeah. So beautiful. So I'm just going to turn around because I wrote this question down and I want to make sure I get this right. So what rights do employees have regard to workplace bullying? So it's just kind of to open up there. And I know you're not a HR specialist and I'm not a HR specialist, but I just think it's a good question to say what's available or what rights do people have?
Yes, so most organisations will have some sort of anti-bullying policy these days. But actually, in terms of when we go right back to legal rights, then if it's harassment, so it's linked to age, race, disability, sex, gender reassignment, there are some more that I can never remember the whole list off the top of my head, but there are 9 protective characteristics. And anything that where there is a link to the protected characteristics in terms of the way somebody is being treated is covered under the Equality Act. And you are covered from recruitment stage. So you're covered from day one in the organisation. If you want to bring a claim, you can bring a claim forward to an employment tribunal and you don't have to leave your job. When we look at bullying, and I use that in the sense of non-discriminatory bullying, so not linked to any of the protected characteristics, then at the moment, there is no legal definition. You have to be in your place of employment for at least 2 years before you get any protection. And actually, if you want to bring a claim, what you have to do is you have to resign and bring a constructive dismissal claim or something of that nature. And the other option that is available to you is that things are so bad that you have a psychiatric injury, and therefore you can go through the civil courts on a personal injury claim, which is a route that it's hard to bring a case, but it's also a route that is not well known for people who are in these situations as well. So it's actually quite limited in terms of your rights if you're quite early in your career. Once you pass those 2 years, yes, you've still got rights, but you have to resign to bring that claim. So it is it's a really poor situation, and that's where some of the work that we've done around the Stop Hurt at Work campaign comes in, because recognising there was a gap in the law, we brought together legal experts who basically put together a proposal, which then we took forward to Rachel Maskell MP, and that proposal formed the basis of the Bullying and Respect at Work Bill. Although what Rachel has also done is extend that further to say that actually there should be a code, a respect code for businesses in terms of behaviours in businesses, and also an accountability route for organisations as well. So if there are multiple cases attached to that organisation, then a body can go in and actually hold them to account. So it's a huge step forward, and that was actually brought into the House of Commons on the 11th of July this year, 23, and so that was a very exciting and emotional day, to say the least. Still a long way to go. Bringing a bill forward and getting it enacted into law is a hugely different process, but basically that work is continuing in the background. So more and more work being done on the drafting of the bill, getting the wording correct, taking it forward. We'll have to take it forward into the next session of Parliament and just keep working. But what it has done is it's raised awareness. It's actually got people talking about this again, and there's been quite a positive response actually. I've seen very little in terms of negative responses. Now, absolutely one of the key arguments is legislation doesn't prevent anything. No, it doesn't. Legislation is only part of the solution, and it just provides consequences. And it fills that gap. So what we're not looking to do is overlap with any existing legislation. It's just filling the gap that exists. But what's really important is that it provides consequences, and it would mean that people would have protection from day one and could stay in their job and bring a case. So exactly the same as a harassment. So you've got that equity. And they're also looking at, being able to claim for injury to feeling, which you can do for a harassment case, but not for a constructive dismissal claim, for example. So it's just about getting that equity in the employment tribunals, but also having that extra level of accountability for organisations as well. So,
and it's lovely there, Nicki, as well, was about that bridging of the gap, because me as just a lay person goes, that does not make common sense, that we've got something missing that we talk about. However, harassment has the rights built in with it. The first 2 years, a lot of employees go, do you know what? First 2 years, you haven't got any rights around that. That's fine. They're going to go, etc. But that's not fair on the individual not to have equal rights. And I really love today talking to you is you're not ramming bullying down my throat. You're just talking it really fairly, really trying to bridge gaps, trying to fill holes where there's missing bits, which I think everyone listening today will go, do you know what, that makes common sense. Come on, let's get behind this and put some good stuff in place, because you're not trying to get asked for things that are not there, if that makes sense. It's just that they're not there. Come on, we need to bridge the gap.
Absolutely, yeah, and a lot of this is common sense. It
Yeah.
absolutely is, and I think I'm just fortunate that I've managed to create this huge network of individuals who are also really passionate about this subject as well, and we share that knowledge and understanding. But one of the things that I found really, really early on, when you go through bullying yourself, then you tend to hold on to a lot of anger and a sense of injustice. And something I learned really early on when I decided to go into this work was you can't change anything from a place of anger.
Yes.
And actually being able to sit down and look at it, to talk to legal experts, to talk to psychologists, neuroscientists, really understand what's going on, is I'm really fortunate that I have just the most amazing job with all these incredible people sharing this knowledge. So yeah.
And you can see on your face and that it just beams from that perspective. So for 2023 going into 2024, what would you say is kind of the personal development you're working on, or for yourself, Nicki?
So there are there's so many different things. Well, I've got the legislation side, which is absolutely fascinating in terms of learning about how legislation is created and taking that through, which is a fascinating journey. I've been doing a lot of work with neuroscientists. We've got our fairly new trauma-informed program as well, which is being delivered by myself and Pat Ferris from Canada. And so that, again, constantly learning the neuroscience and the neurobiology of workplace bullying. So that's always really fascinating. And also learning, working with different sectors as well. So at the conference, we saw, people from the film and TV industry, from the legal sector. There's whistleblowing. Do I have a plan? No, I just absorb this amazing knowledge and I keep going, and it's just incredible, and I absolutely love it. So that does not sound like a nice, neat plan, doesn't it? But I never stop learning in this area, and there are always more people to learn from and have these amazing conversations with.
And I'm just beaming there. I'm smiling as well, because it's just a constant learn, isn't it? It doesn't matter what industry you work in or that, but if you're willing to learn, open-minded, be curious, work with people that are better than you, to go, come on, I need to understand this and work with it. But I can see you there just beaming of, I've got so much richness to learn this year and next year onwards, that it's kind of never ending, but you're there to do something really good for people, which is amazing. And Nicki, how can people reach out or contact you? What's the best way to look at Conduct Change and get hold of Nicki Eyre? What's the best way?
So the website obviously has all the information. It talks about our consultancy work, our training and coaching that we offer. And so that is conductchange.co.uk. And then if they want to message me as well, then LinkedIn is always a great place to find me. So we have, I have my own page on there. We have a Conduct Change page. And if they're interested in all the campaigning and legislation, then do follow the Stop Hurt at Work page as well. But those are the best places, so LinkedIn or conductchange.co.uk.
Yeah. No, fantastic. And I strongly recommend contact with Nicki, reach out to Nicki. There's such a wealth of ideas and experience. And Nicki and I have worked on jobs before, which I've loved, absolutely really enjoyed. And we've learned from each other, which has been wonderful. So Nicki, can I just say a huge thank you today for coming on? I think you've really educated me from a bullying perspective. So I've taken a lot today. So thank you for that. So I'm being greedy from that aspect. But can I just say thank you very much for joining today? Really, really appreciate it. And I know this will go out after the conference, but I'm sure the conference is going to be brilliant. So we'll have you back again to talk about the conference as well. But just thank you so much for joining today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been amazing chatting with you. And it's lovely to have these conversations and refire my enthusiasm each day and week. So thank you.
No, you're very welcome. And it's great for a Monday, isn't it, to get us going? I know this will go out on a Friday, but it's great for a Monday to get us going,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, it is. It's brilliant. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Nicki.